fantastic. So, can everyone hear us? Yeah, great, fantastic. So I think we should all just have a minute silence and pray that it won't rain. I've been slightly obsessively watching the sky all day. Anyway, we're here. That is fantastic. So thank you so much. And before I'm going to introduce our speakers, I have some incredibly thrilling news. Now, for the last 2 or 3 salons, I've noticed that my cakes, the I have bought with love and tender care, weren't eaten any longer. And last time, the ones who were there, I had a big pink cake. Now, that was just, no one ate it. And somebody said, oh, they all think it's poison. It was actually incredibly healthy cake. Anyway, so we ran a Twitter poll, as one does nowadays, and our Twitter community decided that really the problem was that I'm not serving up brownies. So then I tried to find a baker to deliver brownies, and I couldn't find any good brownies. Now, I've never done brownies, and I've never done a cheesecake. And you get both tonight. And I'm going to take it incredibly personal. And I'm serious. I mean, this is awful. If I'm left with all of this, so I'd like every one of you to eat either and the cheesecake is seriously delicious. There's a bit missing already. But, I actually had in my head, I thought, eat and weep. I mean, it is beautiful. It's so moist. It's the best cheesecake you will have ever eaten. On to Shadows on the Tundra, and I'm standing here in front of our panel. Now, I have to say, it's another Peirene book I'm actually incredibly proud of having published. For me, I've just had a conversation where somebody said, the classic, I think your books are getting darker. And so my argument was, I've heard this from the beginning. I've been told my books are too dark. And that actually Shadows on the Tundra, in an odd way, again, I don't think it's a dark book. It is so full of life, and that, what makes one survive. And at the London Book Fair in April, I was, so I heard that the buzz at the moment is you have a lot of women writers, international women writers in their 50 plus, so my age, all writing about liberating themselves, finding their identity, that sort of thing. I think this is 1980s feminism, so why are we still stuck in that? And at the same time, I had in my head this thinking, but actually Shadows on the Tundra is a real feminist book. Because here we have a young woman in the most horrible, unfree circumstances, and she finds freedom. She finds herself, she has a voice, she is herself, even in those circumstances. So I think, as feminist texts go, I think that one is, it's amazing. Unfortunately, Dalia, the author, can't, of course, be with us any longer. And she's also a woman I would have loved to meet. So we have a stellar panel here tonight. And I start with Vytene, the lady in this, we have 2 ladies in a yellow dress, but this is Vytene. And I actually came across Shadows on the Tundra because of Vytene. She is the translator of the German edition. And also, Vytene knew Dalia. Dalia lived with Vytene's aunt and died when Vytene was 15. So she is the next best thing, really. She can tell us who this woman actually was. Joining us then is Dalia. Delia, sorry. Delia, who is our translator, Peirene's translator, who has flown in from America to be here. So yes, so she really, yes.
Delightful audience, I can tell already. So
that. And then we have Algirdas. Now Algirdas is actually another hero here, because we've never met until tonight. I thought what I would like is somebody actually who has an experience of gulag, who was born in a gulag in Siberia. And so I got in touch with the Lithuanian Institute, and they recommended Algirdas and said, get in touch with him. And I mean, I'm so impressed. You just turned up here, all these strangers. And so we're very happy you're here. And so another experience, another part of that experience. So thank you for coming. And then moderated tonight will be by the other yellow dress, Rosie Goldsmith. I'm sure, but actually some of you must be familiar with Rosie by now. She's done a number of events, Peirene events and so on. So I'm delighted, fantastic, over to you lot.
Where are you going to sit?
I'm going to just sit on your lap, really.
It is really, really wonderful to be back here in the garden. It's fine. It's warm. But as somebody said, I mean, we're not going to make cheap jokes tonight. But as somebody said, just think. At least we're not in Siberia. It is warm enough here. It really is. And we're going to try to paint. That wasn't my cheap joke, but I'm going to spot the person who made that cheap joke. Yeah. Very, very good. But first of all, before
warm in Siberia, actually.
Yeah, it's probably, it is actually. There are about 2 months when it's warmer than anywhere else. But first of all, congratulations to Micah and Peirenepress for 10 years of excellence, and really has some of those wonderful. This book has come about for so many reasons, and we have some of the key players here tonight, and it is such an important story. It is such an important book, and I just wanted to check first of all how many of you actually read the book, which is really wonderful. I know there's always one person here who prides himself on not reading the book. I'm not going to actually point out who that is either, but he promised tonight that he will actually read it. And this is the one to read. This is, if you read Anne Frank, if you read Primo Levi, if you read any of those books, this is as important. It's an absolutely earth-shattering book, but it's also so affirmative, life affirmative, and so incredibly moving that we all have an obligation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how the book came about, because it's a very unusual genesis. But also we're going to find out how each person here plays a key role in how this book came about, but also the history of that time. And because Dalia, she's called Dalia.
Dalia, that was very good.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Algirdas didn't think I'd be able to pronounce it. But,
Dalia.
Dalia. So we're going to keep it to first names, because all Lithuanian names are incredibly long. Lithuanian names do make sense, but they're just too long. So we're going to keep it short. We're going to keep it very good. I thought that might help all of us. And we're colour-coded, as you can see. So the lady in yellow is Vytene here, Algirdas is in grey, and then we've got Delija, who's in dark blue. I need to write all this. But because Dalia isn't here, I wanted to start just by reading something that we've all agreed I should read, so that she can be with us. Because this is her as she experienced this trauma. She was 14 years old. She left Kaunas, which was the capital of Lithuania at the time. How's that for level at the moment? Okay?
Don't get any quieter, please.
Right, it is actually shouting, but I'm
no,
really
it's fine,
sorry.
but don't get me quieter.
Okay, so she was 14 years old, and she left Kaunas in 1941 with her mother and her brother. Her father was already in the concentration camp. What happened was, as you know, that there were thousands of Lithuanians, thousands of Baltic states, Estonians, Lithuanians, and Latvians who were deported because of Stalin's purges, but also because they needed cheap labour in these unpopulated, underpopulated, unconstructed areas of Siberia and, you know, gulag. So that's why, you know, so many thousands of people were deported. But, and also just because they were cruel. Simple as that. And so these train loads of people were leaving the Baltics in 1941. There were trainloads and trainloads of deportations in that time. And so in 1941, this young girl, teenager, were left with her mother and her brother, as I said, in a train. It took them several months to get to basically up near the Arctic Circle. And I think they started in 1941, they got there in August 1942. And the very first thing they had to do was to build somewhere to live, build barracks to live. There was nothing. There was Tundra. The title is a fantastic title, Shadows on the Tundra. Now in German, it is, what is it?
Aber der Himmel grandios.
Aber der Himmel grandios, and that's a quote, yes, from Dalia. Basically, but the sky is grandiose. That's the translation, and that's actually it's a wonder above. And this is a fantastic description of this amazing young woman who went through these appalling and cruel and very destructive and very painful, you know, illness, everything. But she was still somebody who was determined to stay alive. So they arrived, and I think these two readings here, very short readings, give you an idea of the two sides of her life in that time. We've agreed that I'll just read these short passages so that she is with us, at least. So this is where they were working 16 hours a day on a beetroot farm, I think it was, to begin with. 16 hours for a 15-year-old girl by the time she arrived. Many young people, mostly women and children, they were there in this absolutely godforsaken part of the world, and they were working, but they still found time to have a bit of a good time together. The evenings here were extraordinary. Bonfires were lit after sundown. We were living in a forest, so branches were plentiful. We kept the fires going till dawn. Everyone would gather around the bonfires, young and old alike. In that great expanse, the fires glimmered like so many specks of light, and Lithuanians by the thousand sang to forget their troubles. The forest trembled with their mighty sound. We usually began with the deportee anthem, "Return us to our fatherland." I'm neither musical nor sentimental, but this song would shake me to the core every time. I can't imagine any choir, any music, any melody anywhere sounding more beautiful than the songs the Lithuanian deportees sang on the forested shores of the Angara River. The singing would begin at one bonfire and be picked up at another, then at a third, and so on, until the immense forest filled with the anguished Lithuanian melodies. We would find ourselves back in the Lithuania of our dreams, and we would weep. The songs united us. This is a 15-year-old girl. And then the contrasting story, and that's all in the present tense, we're going to talk about that too. This is the other side of her life. My mother is sick. Her whole head is swollen up. She weighs no more than 30 kilos and looks like a girl. Her ribs stick out and her legs are so thin that they're nothing but skin over bones. She seems light enough for me to lift and carry outside in my arms. She has a fever. She can't see anything because her eyes are swollen too. Josas and I sit there watching her. One terrible fear draws us closer together. Then we hug each other and weep. Dalia, if Mama dies, I'm going to kill myself with this knife, says my brother, who's lying on his stomach. I can feel his long, lean, debilitated body shaking with sobs. Mum is already unconscious. For the first time since this nightmare began, I pray, dear God, don't take my mother. Don't take my mother, I plead, while hugging her unresponsive body, which has become no more than a skeleton, and her red, horribly deformed, swollen face. I'll leave it at that, but that's the reading for now because we've got so much to talk about, but you can see the extraordinary power of these words. And I'm going to go straight in and ask Vytene, who actually met Dalia. Tell us about this girl.
I don't know, should I stand
Yes,
up?
please.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I apologize, I'm not native speaker, and if you cannot understand or catch something, just interrupt me, feel free and ask, and I will try to explain it. Yeah, thank you. I'm very glad to be here, and I think Dalia would be really very, very glad also to be here. I got her know in my summer holidays in western part of Lithuania, where she lived since 1964, when she was allowed to come back to Lithuania, permitted, because many years she wasn't. And then she studied and came to Lukuva. It was a small town, a small hospital, and she built it up and worked until she wasn't allowed to work any longer, because it was a sad story that the deportees, when they were allowed to come back, they wasn't welcomed, actually. They were like people from second or the third class, because they had really, it was very, for them, how to say, it was like harassment. It was very, very difficult to find a job. It was very difficult to find where to live. And sometimes it was told, it was really like a system, you know, it was told, oh, you want to work here, okay, but you have to register that you live here. You go then to the office, you want to register there, they tell, but you have to have a job. And it was, you know, like a circle. They were, so officially they were permitted, but in practice they were not welcomed. And Dalia, actually, she wasn't like, you know, a political dissident, that she wanted to do something against Soviet regime. She just wanted, when she came back, to work and to do something meaningful. And a doctor is something like mostly meaningful what you can do. And that was the reason, because she, if you have read the book, she had to do a lot of work which was not meaningful, you know, it was not dignity for people. And then she started, she built it up, she was very, very good at school. So with grades, actually, she could have chosen to work in big cities like Vilnius and Kaunas. But it was on purpose that she went to this provincial town, because of the doctors. It was league of good doctors, and she wanted to help people really. And but still, in that system, it wasn't possible to be honest and to do good job. You became somehow political.
I'm going to start with that, because this was the Soviet time, of course, and she was having to, you know, keep very. This is the 1970s.
Yes.
So it was very, very difficult time for her.
Yes.
So she had come back completely bruised by the experience. Her mother had died, her
Yes.
brother and her father had all died.
Yes.
She had nobody. And she came out, she decided to train as a doctor.
Exactly. And then as she became, because she became like orders. You shouldn't do that and shouldn't do this. For example, if somebody was in the party and was alcoholic, she told, no, you shouldn't work there. But she told, but I'm in the party, and she told, that doesn't matter, you are not a good worker.
In your introduction, you said a really interesting, you used a very interesting word. You said that they didn't like her because she was awkward.
Yes.
That was a very good English translation, I think, of a, I'm trying to think what the German would be. Anyway, somebody wrote it in German.
Yes.
You probably wrote it in
Yes, and telling the
Yeah.
truth, somehow it was political.
Yeah.
Just being honest. And then she had to leave her job, and then she was without job and without. It was 74, and I was born 72, and then she moved. She had no job and no home, and she moved in to my aunt. She lived also in that small town.
It was because they were in the same town. Is
Yes,
that right? Okay.
and they were friends.
Yeah.
Because both of them, they loved literature, they loved theater, and so on. And then I met her because I visited my aunt every summer, and I met also Dalia.
What was your first impression of her?
Yeah, my impression was that she's very strong, very artistic, beautiful woman, and strong person, very interesting person. And we had sometimes discussions. I remember as she died, I was 15, so
She was 60.
16.
She was 60 when she died.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
She died
she
in
was
1987.
80.
So
Yes.
yeah.
But I remember I was like Soviet school children, normal girl, and I went to the school, and of course I heard the stories about Lenin, and I liked him. And he was really a nice guy, and he learned all the
Love to
foreign.
kill children.
Yes, and he put pencils, and he loved languages.
Yeah.
And I remember I went also in the summer now, and I told her, and that Lenin, he was really cool.
So let's talk about Dalia. How did she react to
Yes,
that?
yes. And
Yeah.
she reacted, she looked at me and told, I have a book, look, and this book is written, he was deported by Tsar also to Siberia. And in that book it was like written his letters, and he wrote to, I don't know, his parents or somebody, yes, I'm now like deported, I'm this in exile, and it's okay. I have one woman, she comes and cooks for me, and actually I would like to go to hunt, and I need actually 3 dogs. Could you please send for that hunting these 3 dogs, and the food, is okay, and that woman, but she cooked properly, okay, I'm exiled. And she told me then, and and it was also people that didn't have such nice experience in exile, but I couldn't understand what she meant, and that is really
So
something
in
crucial.
school, you weren't taught about that time?
No, not at all. And what is really for me very shocking, and was a motivation to work with this book, that I knew her very well. I thought, I talked to her, I loved her, and so on, and I didn't know anything about her story because it wasn't allowed, it was like dangerous to tell children. You never know what children tell another. It wasn't allowed to memorize, to tell about this. It was even dangerous, and I was shocked because first about her story I did got to know in the 90s, when Lithuania gained again independence. And I was shocked, and I thought, in what kind of country I have lived. I felt as a child, okay, I had a nice childhood, but I knew like nothing, and it was for me crucial. Yeah.
I think we need to all stand up, actually. That's okay. So I think it's important we stand up so you can hear us. Delia, do you mind standing up as well? We're going to make
Should I sit down?
No. I think it's best so you can hear us. Okay?
But what about Algirdas?
No,
That's why
I'm just
it's...
waiting my turn.
At the moment, it's just to find out a little bit more about the story, I think, because the story of how the book came about, which is really interesting, because it started here and then it moved here, but it's also there. So this is what's so amazing about all these people together. And don't worry, Algirdas, we're going to get this is a very unusual situation for us to all to be standing like this, but to have the chorus in the back of the show. But the book came about. The book is many books. But what you heard when I was reading was it was in the present tense. Now that story is one of 3 books that she wrote. Now I'm going to actually ask Dalia now to explain about these different books.
Yes, okay, so when she came back to Lithuania illegally,
So she was
she was actually
14, she was 6 years in
actually,
Siberia.
8 years total, 8 years total from
But
the time
initially she was
At
there.
that
farm.
moment.
At that moment, yeah.
And when
So
she
from the age of
returned
14 to 21.
to
she
21,
returned.
roughly 21, and she knew that she would be caught by the KGB sooner or later, needed to get her stuff down on paper, and began to write on loose leaf sheets of paper without benefit of revision, editing. When you look at her manuscript, few changes, a word here, a change there. I mean, in other words, what you're getting is a material that is literally coming out in white heat. And she's writing relatively recently. Neither Primo Levi nor Elie Wiesel nor Charlotte Delvaux nor many of the Holocaust writers wrote almost immediately after they returned. So time changes your perspective. She was writing, and you get that white heat of emotion in her. But the point is that then she buried it, and when she returned from...
Because she was
deported a second time.
Yeah.
That is,
Yeah.
she was caught by the KGB. They couldn't understand what was going on. They asked her mother about her mother. She said her mother died, but there was no record of her mother dying, because that's a whole different story. She buried her in the basement, and so they arrested her and deported her again. And when she was deported again and returned, she looked for the manuscript, could not find it. And you can only imagine the heartache. I mean, there it is. She said she actually looked for it a number of times, but was unable to find it. And she only went at night looking for it because it was a dangerous thing to do, and you couldn't get the neighbors around.
Where she hid it
in the ground.
In a preserving jar.
Yes, in a glass jar.
229.
29.
229 loose sheets of paper written in pencil and ink. Not even ordered. No chapters, no nothing. What the book?
It was a flow. It was a flow. A flow from inside, an inner flow.
So there they are in a glass jar. She buries them in the garden of her former home. When she comes back to it, someone else is living there. She can only search for it at night when nobody's watching or listening, and she cannot find it.
And it is a very small, nice story. I went with German reporters. I wrote a big article, and then we did something for television, German television. We went, and I met that woman who found.
Yes,
And
quite by
she
accident.
And she told that she know that people, the neighbors, thought that Dalia was digging and searching for the gold of the family. I was my aunt, and they digged and searched, and they couldn't find it.
And accidentally, a woman who was living there in 1991, 1991, she was transplanting her peony bush. She finds this glass jar, delivers it to the museum. See? And when she delivers it to the museum, they realize, of course, what they have, and they publish it almost immediately. And it happens to coincide. This is after her death.
So she died in 1987. So she never ever saw it. She never found
And it was just before, all the movement and opening.
So, in 1991, pretty much when Lithuania was liberated.
Yes,
So,
in fact, for Lithuania, it was a real boon, because this stimulated people to rise up, to be motivated, to be inspired by the past, which they knew very little about, and the rest is history. But when she did not find her original manuscript, she was persuaded to write another one. And it was basically the same story, but without any of the immediate emotion. It wasn't a narrative. It was more like an essay. It was more discursive. And she felt she was bearing witness. So there were long lists of names. And this is what Holocaust writers tell us about. They need to record for history who died and how. And so she does that. And there are some interesting facts that were not in the original, so it does enhance.
This book is basically, this is about
That
just over
very
a
first
year.
one.
This is 1941 to just the beginning of 43 possibly, and it ends suddenly as well. It's a complete book. It's absolutely brilliant.
But we have different versions.
But there are
why-
different versions.
We have different versions by the reason of ending. because
Ah,
both
yes.
of you think it was finished, and
Yes.
I think it was at that moment that she digged because the KGB was observing her,
Yes.
and she
had to hide
thought-
it.
Yeah,
She had to hide it.
Yeah, to preserve, because she knew it would be destroyed. If they find it, it would be destroyed.
So she
but-
had to hurry. Had to
Yes.
hurry.
Yes, well, see, there is a dispute here. The
Dalia
editors,
knows the truth.
yes, and nobody knows whether she meant it as an end, but the editors who found it, I believe, who ended up publishing the manuscript, did write, manuscript breaks off at this point. But when I was translating it, it occurred to me that it does not break off because, well, actually, when you read Holocaust literature, most Holocaust literature ends with the liberation. The liberation came relatively quickly. That is, you're deported in 43 or 44, the war's over in 45, there's liberation. But Dalia and Siberians, the deportees, were not liberated until 1953, 56, after Stalin died. So it cannot end
Until
with
19,
liberation.
actually.
And even, so,
So, there's so much to discuss in Charles. By the way, we haven't forgotten about Algirdas.
oh, poor man sat down.
There is such an amazing story that you're going to hear, but we need to set up the story first of all with these two talking about Dalia and this book, because this is part of it, but also an addition. So I promise you we haven't forgotten, just because he's a man. You know, mine is talking about exactly. I know. I just wanted to set that out there. Mine is talking about being a feminist, but it's actually a novel for all mankind, all humanity. But the point about this is why. What I want to say, why do you think she wrote it?
You're asking
No, I'm
Alg-
asking you two.
Oh, me.
Why
Oh.
did she write this? Had she written as a child? What kind of child was she? Was she? I mean,
She was a very creative person. Because
is there any
she-
evidence of any writing before she left?
No, not. But she wrote always on the diary books. I saw
Yeah.
it at my aunt's
Okay,
place, and also she tried to do a small novels. Also, there were different tries how to put the right form. But I know this about this that she couldn't find the manuscript. You know, the first
Yes.
manuscript that we now can read, and I know only that for her, from the telling of my aunt, it was the most important thing in her life, you know, just, to build like a little bit, to build a monument for people.
So did she say this? That this
Yes.
is what she wanted
Okay.
to do? Yeah.
Let me expand on that. She loved the theater. That is, when she was, when the soldiers or whoever it was that was rounding up the Lithuanians said, pack the most important things that you need. She packed all the playbills that she attended at the theater in Kaunas. So the theater was important, and she has a very natural dramatic sense. And even though she may not have ever written anything, she had enough experience, even before she was 15 years old, of attending the theater. She, as you recall, there are flashbacks to when she's going to the theater and how exciting it is, and how she notices the actors and they seem to notice them, and you know there's an exchange. So she had a natural interest, and she cultivated it probably intellectually. If I were Dalia, it seems to me, with all these natural abilities that were never really expressed beforehand, and she has an experience such as most people do not ever experience, I can see her planning a future novel or a future memoir in her mind. Certainly one would do that. It would also keep one's sanity. We have evidence of people who have undergone concentration camp experiences where they recall entire texts of plays and put them on in order to stay intellectually and spiritually alive.
Does that match with the person that you met and that your aunt knew?
Yes,
Yes.
that's true. Because I remember, so they lived actually very modest. It was a small wooden house, like 2 small rooms, but it was everything full. It was a carpet on the wall, and it was full of poems and excerpts and with some notes, and it was full like vitrage or something like this, because they were so interested and they discussed sometimes and in Russian and in Lithuanian and switch, and I, as a child, sometimes I thought they argue what, and I was like upset, and my aunt, no, we just, that beginning of that play, Dalia doesn't understand. It was like, it's like intellectual Salon.
Which is exactly what Michael was achieving. So was it important for her to be published?
Yes, I think it was like she hasn't family, her own children, and husband, and somehow it was her child. It was, I think, the most important thing for her. That was the reason that I thought I have, sometimes it's like people cannot finish their things, and I had the feeling, as my aunt died, she also tried, she did the additional Lithuanian, but she died, she passed away 2008, and then I thought, then I waited like 2 years, maybe somebody will pick up and do something, and it was nobody, and then I thought I have to help her,
Well, maybe I can add the fact that when she couldn't find her first manuscript, she had the second one delivered, this is to me fascinating, to Sakharov, remember the dissident?
Yes.
And his wife Elena Bonner?
Yes.
In fact, when I first had the idea of translating it, a fellow deportee at Trofimov said maybe you should get in touch with Elena Bonner and have her write a foreword. But Elena Bonner was already sickly because she knew of Dalia personally. That is, the manuscript, the second manuscript, having never found the first, was delivered into the hands of Sakharov and Bonner, and it became, as it were, samizdat, which was a work for the drawer and passed around between hands.
Dissident literature, basically. Because that's what happened, because none of this was published, sort of in mainstream publishing at all until after Lithuania was liberated.
Right.
Which is, again, an extraordinary story in publishing history for all the Baltic states as well, which is why now, I don't know whether any of you went to, were aware that just in April, it was London Book Fair, and they had a focus on Baltics literature. It was the most extraordinary time for them, because so much contemporary literature was coming out, and it's now being published, by people like Micah. And it's a great time for contemporary literature, but a lot of it is still going over this history. A lot of it is still very much concerned with these periods, but there's nothing like this, is there? Are there any other examples of memoirs
gulag.
like this?
Actually, there are.
From Lithuania.
From Lithuania, but this is considered to be the best of them. That is the most literary, the most compelling. The others are important. In fact, all records like this are important for archival reasons. Everybody should, but none of it is quite as literary, as compelling, as powerful as that.
And what very important thing is, I would like to add, many people wrote then in the 90s, when Lithuania again gave the independence, and nobody dared to write 48 and 49, and something very, very seldom.
In 1948 and 1949.
Yes.
Very, very,
very
unique,
very
terrible
unique.
time.
Yeah, it's the same like Solzhenitsyn or Varlam Shalamov, that they wrote, and at that time, and this powerful voice of a woman who wrote 48, so we almost don't have, almost don't have this in the.
Now, Algirdas, the time has come. Did you read this? You're Lithuanian. You were born in Irkutsk. Your family, your parents were in this part of the world. Had a similar story, which we're going to hear about. Did you read Dalia's? Did you hear about it in school?
Oh, of course not. Well, I read it when I got it from the publisher, and only in English translation.
Will you read it in Lithuanian?
No.
Would you like to read it in Lithuanian?
Of course.
Yes.
Is it published? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
But
There
it's
are many editions.
thanks to Dalia and Micah that it's in English. So yes. Yeah. So So what is your impression of this book when you read about it now? You've just read it.
Yes.
We'll start with this and then we'll go back and
None of the translation, just the basic story.
Yes.
She's worried. This is a professor of computer science, by the way, who loves literature.
The book is in a way difficult to read. Even if I knew what I was going to face there, I knew the background of how people live there, etc. It's difficult to read, difficult to follow, because as it was said, it was collection of the loose sheets without any structure. It was constructed in a certain way by publishers, probably to follow a certain kind of narrative to make it a readable story. And
I don't think it needed that much organisation.
well,
To be fair to the editors and the publishers.
yes.
It was quite clear what.
First time ever I read anything like that was about 1977, when I was a student, and somebody passed to me a copy of the Solzhenitsyn book One Day of Ivan Denisovich.
One Day in the Life of Ivan
Yes,
Denisovich.
yes.
Yeah.
Which at the time was not available anywhere in the library. It was published in Khrushchev time, but then was taken out of the public space. People kept it in the private libraries and just passed from one to another in hiding, because storing it was dangerous. You can face problems with authorities because of that. And of course, from my family, I heard stories about their life when they were deported from Lithuania in 1948, when Dalia was writing this book. It was June 1948. So this years it is.
Your parents,
My grandparents.
your grandparents were deported.
And my
from
mother at the time was 14 years old,
Same-
exactly as
same
Dalia
as
was
Wow.
in this book. My grandmother was taken out of the school before finishing of her exams at the time, and was held during the night at the police, and then she was joined with her family at the train station just to find out that they're all going to Siberia. And it was about 2 weeks journey to Irkutsk, where they
2 weeks.
2 weeks
Yeah.
on the cattle train
Yeah.
with all the facilities, very a hole in the corner of the carriage
Carriage,
for,
yes.
for,
Yeah.
for using a toilet.
So when you were reading this book, and bearing in mind that there's been so little written about this period, and this is something that's your story as well, how did you feel reading it?
Well, it was recognizable, first of all, about the life, what I heard from my parents. It was nothing like fictitious. And as I said, it really difficult to follow the story, because sometimes it's too sad. And
It's hard for anybody to read. I mean, the majority of you have read this. I mean, it's unimaginable. I mean, with the way she talks and writes in this, or sometimes quite matter-of-fact way, about the lies and the disinterest.
and sometimes with very good humor.
Yes.
Yes.
And what reminded me that, yes, what reminded me that when I read already, when I moved to Lithuania, I read a book of Balys Sruoga, who is a Lithuanian writer, about his experience in the Nazi camp. There is a book called
See, it's
Vytene
a
Muschick.
Nazi concentration
Yes.
camp. Yes. It's a very famous.
the Forest of Gods in English translation.
Does anybody
Right.
know this book? Again, it's one of these books that's just come out in recent
Yes.
years.
About Stutthof.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes. So,
And then
yeah.
another thing which came also later on was, as you mentioned, Shalamov's books about
Yes.
Kolyma stories. And there was recently a movie produced in Lithuania called Excursante, or Excursionist, about a girl who escaped from this train which was going to Siberia, and she returned to Lithuania about her story, which is based on the real story. And part of my family, my second level aunt from mother's side was deported to Siberia also in 1941. Then she was returned, then she was deported again after the Second World War. So,
I mean, when you think how many thousands of people died in the gulags, or okay, well, not necessarily gulags, but died in that period, died in that part of the world, in Siberia, and the fact that only now many people are beginning to talk about it. Did your parents ever talk about it?
300,000 people.
300,000
Of Lithuanians?
Yes.
Lithuanians, yeah.
Considering that it only has 3 million
10% of-
people in the country.
Yeah, but they were not only Lithuanians, all who lived. It was also Jewish,
And Polish.
yeah, Polish and Russians.
Remember, we've got to remember the geography of that area, of course, which is, you know, very mixed, very multicultural, incredibly, rich language and cultures and politics and so on. Really amazing. But I do want to know, how did your parents ever talk about this?
Well, not really. I just occasionally heard some stories that when they discussed about some of relatives, and there was something like, oh, that's what was when we were on the train at that place, or when we were working at the forest at such area, which were, the part of the family stories.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So why did you grow up in Siberia?
Well, my mother, as I said, was taken with my grandparents' family to Siberia, and on the train they met with my father's family, who is a few years older than her. And
On the train?
on the train, yes. Then they stayed almost all the time together in Siberia, and then they got married, and in 1958 I was born in Irkutsk, and my mother got some job as accountant at some small.
It sounds very much like Dalia's romance with Algirdas.
Yes.
Now, if he hadn't disappeared into the blizzards, it may have been a very similar ending there.
Now, both you are Lithuanian as well, so just very briefly tell us about your background.
Yeah, actually, what you told, Algirdas told, somehow every family is touched by this, neighbors or relatives, or for example, my family, my grandfather was deported, and my mother was like 1 year old. She was on the list also, and it was all the families. The men were separated mostly, they didn't know, and the family children were another, settlement, and the men to camps. And my mother, for example, to escape and not to be found, my mother had got another document with different date of birth. And even my mother, she passed away 2 years ago, and she had the documents, And my aunt had another first name, and it was because not, and you can't find it everywhere. I feel sometimes I am not as old, but I feel sometimes very old because the history, I really, I face the history everywhere, and you, for example. Yes.
Actually, my family's fate may very well have been like Dalia's, and I might have very well been born on a train, because Lithuania was occupied 3 times. First, the Russians came in. They were ousted by the Germans occupied it, and then as the Russians were about to come, my parents realized, knowing what happened in 1941, they realized that if they didn't want to experience the same thing, they had to better flee. So in 1944, I guess in the spring of 1944, they headed for the closest border, which happened to be Germany. And I was born in Memmingen, in Bavaria. And then they came to America, and that was the story of my life. It could very have been like the story of Dalia's life.
Yes.
And I mean, and just a very, very small Lithuanian point that something that we found, my husband and I, through working on the Baltics recently, and in fact I produced a magazine. Micah and I work very closely together. I work with a lot of other writers and translators as well. But my husband, we asked my husband to review a book by Germany which you might know. It's called Shtetl Love Song. It's a Lithuanian book that's been translated quite recently. And he was reviewing this book, and he said, "This just sounds so familiar." And my husband is a Lithuanian Jew. Now, he's never, ever explored his history. And even when I tell you this now, I think, oh my God, it was such an amazing moment. When he was reviewing this book, he was reading this book, which has just been translated. Again, the power of translation. And in this book, he's realised that a lot of that story from the Shtetl is his family story. And so again, this is a story that we all share in some way. It's not even 6 degrees of separation.
Right.
But there's another amazing aspect of this story too, which Algirdas, I think, you've got to tell us about this too. Dalia wrote a story. She wrote the story of her life, which was so powerful. It's written in the present tense. You really feel you're there, in the blizzards, with the lice, with the dysentery, with all the smells, the corpses piling up outside the front of the door. And then I heard from your mother actually wrote her own memoir as well. And we've saved it, so we haven't even seen this.
Oh.
That's the book of my mother. Memoirs.
What's your mother's name?
Palmyra.
What's she called?
Palmyra.
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 Palmyra. Amazing name. So tell us how this came about, and when did she write this?
She wrote it in Kaunas when she learned how to use computer.
Did you teach her? Did you
No,
teach her?
she attended the third age university. She's self-taught in that kind of sense, and she's still using it. She is doing all accounting of the expenses as she is accounted on the Excel.
How old is she?
84.
Maybe you should ask to do
So who published this? And
Oh, it is kind of self-published. I helped to typeset it, but I mean, it was rather printed than published in proper way.
so, what happened to this book? I mean, has it gone out to, is it on nationwide? Is it published all over the country, or do people read it? In sort of.
Well, she is not very successful in marketing.
She needs Micah.
Yeah. That I think would be the next stage to translate it into English and make it more available.
But when you compare the stories, are there similarities?
Of course, there are similarities about how people live it and how they kind of try to survive.
She is forthright as Dalia. Dalia is criticized by the Lithuanian public for not having sanitized some of the
I was
stories.
going to say,
That is
how was it received?
not well. You can tell more. And
Vytene,
I've only
tell
read
us.
a few articles that suggested that we even have a mutual friend who says, you shouldn't be translating this book. You should be translating X's book, because X's book looks more at the positive side of human nature. And but of course, what makes it authentic is the fact that she tells it exactly like it is. So if it is a happy day, she tells you about the happiness. If it is not, she tells you that. Otherwise, there's no reason to believe her if it's all, a single shade of gray or whitewashed.
She writes what she experienced, what she sees, and it's not like, we are all only victims, and that nation is victim, and another nation is like
The
that.
perpetrator.
Yeah, exactly. She writes, it's, I think, somehow universal about human being and inhumanity, and losing of dignity, and there are no nations, and that's what, for me, it's very interesting and valuable. And her book is, in any case, was edited many times in Lithuania, is in the schools you have also pupil read, but of course we have many testimonies.
Set text.
Yes.
And also there's a day, isn't there, of national mourning in
Yes.
Lithuania, which is June the 14th.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Which was 2 days ago.
Yes.
2 days ago. Isn't that amazing? Amazing timing.
But there's also a day like
And that's
the
the-
hope, mourning and hope, and what
Yeah. Now you actually, Vytene, there's in the wonderful introduction in this book. It's really wonderful. You actually said the sentence which I thought was great. I made it my mission to ensure that her very personal yet timeless experiences should become accessible in other languages. Now, this comes to the point of translation and of getting it out there into other languages. How many other languages does it exist in?
Yeah, I'm very glad that it's really Dalia getting friends. You are like now also in club. Welcome in club.
There's no escape now.
Yes, it's really, and she
Yeah.
is already in Finnish and French and Italian.
German.
They were German, and I got a new yesterday that from Netherlands.
The Netherlands.
Yeah, it's also interest, so maybe they will
Turk?
Yeah, the Turkish, Polish.
Any of Russian?
Russian, well, you know, it is not so easy. For the translator who translates Russian.
I mean, there is no people to translate?
I mean, to survive maybe now. Translator to survive in
Algirdas,
Russian.
is Lithuanian or Russian your first language? Which is your first language?
First is Lithuanian.
Alright.
I spoken Lithuanian perfectly before I started to attend school. And then my Lithuanian kind of was blanked by Russian, my Russian at school was like between pass and good. Never excellent. That was my marks for Russian language.
And you've lived here in this country a long time now. How do people in this country react to? Did they ever talk about
What?
this history that we've been talking about tonight? Do you ever talk to them about it? When people hear you come from Lithuania, do they ask you about Lithuania?
They ask you where it is, right?
Well, that's correct. Not everybody knows where is Lithuania. They mix it up with Riga and Tallinn and things like that. And well, to people who are interested, I talk about my personal story, but not too many very so far.
It's starting. Maybe this is a start. How would you all? I mean, we'll have some questions from you, but how would you all assess the importance of this particular memoir? And
I mean, Dalia's.
Dalia's,
Yes,
yeah.
of course, it is very important. I think the best would be if it would be make a film.
Well, she's dramatic enough.
Because I think there is so many episodes
Yes.
which can be film it. It
Yes,
would be
you can
from
make
various
great play
aspects.
as well.
Yes, yes.
But it has to
So
be
many characters can be
Yes.
created.
I mean, this is again, talk about the writing. I mean, it's so lyrical in sense. There's this kind of combination of sort of plain, matter of fact, everyday drudgery, and then suddenly there's this lyrical singing and all these other wonderful moments that she describes. And then she has these character sketches. I mean, you can really picture the teacher and Algirdas and all the other people and her mother and her brother. And I mean, it's so full, isn't it? And so many
Yes, it
wonderful
is.
stories in it.
Right. One of the most important is the one man who kind of she took the initiative. If the snowstorm covered up the entrance, she was the first one out there digging.
Yes.
She was joined by this man named Kirkstanis. And he was quite a character. She did not admire him. He may have been Lithuanian. She did not like him. She said he was good to his family, but he'd climb over corpses in order to get where he was going. And but he's a central figure, he's like the elder of the group. And so she describes his death, which I think is just an incredibly awful description, but also so telling of the way one can get used to anything. We have a Lithuanian saying, a dog can get used to a hanging. So you've got this man dying, and everybody gives him a moment of silence. And then they go back to cooking and baking and clattering, and I love what she says. She says, well, we've all got a job to do, some to die, some to cook, some to chat. You know, it just, ultimately, it falls in line with your home in exile.
Algirdas, you've got
Yes.
they
I
did
just
something
now
else.
found something from my mother's memories. That next day after she'd been arrested from the school, and about 11 o'clock, all the school children, they were collected and very sat to the
Say it in
truck, and then instead of start crying, they started to think Lietuva brangi.
Lithuania, my precious country, my precious Lithuania.
So that's about Lithuanian thinking. Thinking at every
step of the
And
way.
they still do.
Yes,
They
well,
still
the
do.
story
I mean,
goes, you put 3 Lithuanians together, they may have no class, but they certainly have a good time singing.
Unfortunately, in politics,
For singing, they have 3 Lithuanians.
unfortunately, in politics, there is a saying that 3 Lithuanian, 5 parties. Very difficult to agree.
Have any of you got any questions from the book or from any of the things that we've been saying?
I have a biographical question actually. What happened to her brother? Because that's not mentioned, I don't think.
It's interesting because she's not writing it in that consequential way where, you know, it's a novel where that person's explained and that person. It's really interesting that. I was wondering as well what happened to Joseph.
Well, my feeling is she and her brother did not get along. I don't believe she respected him. She was a strong one in the family. She wore the
He
pants.
was older, wasn't
He was older,
Yeah.
but
There's a
he
picture,
was
there's
in
an
many
interesting-
ways.
There's one point where she follows his example though. He stands up, she goes, all right, I better do the same.
Maybe.
In that case, yes, when he joined the cooperative, and so she went along with that. But what I understand, he married, the girl is mentioned in the story towards the end, Regina Stalauskaitė. And he marries her, and so when she returns to Lithuania, I don't know the facts, but I'm guessing that he stayed behind because we know she left with her mother. What happened to the brother?
Yes, I know the facts.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead.
He stayed there because he didn't want to escape. He wanted to wait until he gets the permit, and he married.
Yes,
He was 17, but he wanted to do it legally. He didn't want any problems. And Dalia is a person who doesn't care to get problems.
But she
or not.
was-
And the
it was
mother
her
wanted.
mother.
The mother wanted. She was very ill and wanted to go back and to die in Lithuania. It was her wish, and it wasn't possible to do it legally. Only illegal. So Dalia
They
did it.
had to be smuggled out
Yes.
of Siberia. In fact.
True.
Yes, and so she died in 1950. I think,
Yes.
which actually is interesting because you were talking about the KGB, you know, tracking them down and them having to hide the pieces of paper, the manuscript. And her mother died in the same month, didn't she? And then they had to,
And
she
the
died in May.
5th of May, and it was like, for me it was like, I don't know, antique tragedy, like Antigone.
Yes.
That young girl digging by herself, is not allowed to bury.
That's the first scene of the film.
In the cellar, I saw that, that cellar, and she.
Now she's talking about the burial of her mother.
Yes.
Yes.
But also the burial of her mother, but also then the burial of the preserving.
And then manuscript, and then she was kept. Yes, again. And, the brother died in the 80s. In Lithuania. Then he returned to Kaunas. He stayed in Kaunas.
When did he return from Siberia?
I don't know exactly the year, but I think after 56, when Stalin died, 53, it was 53. It was Yes, I'm sorry if I mixed some time.
Incredibly multilingual.
No
Lithuanians,
problem.
you know. They are very multilingual. But any question?
Perhaps my history is deficient, but I couldn't really understand why all these thousands of people were deported to this particular place where there was nothing there and no real means for economic regeneration. I mean, what was the... I didn't understand.
You
kill them.
basically you've described history.
Well, there was a reason. That is, and the reason was that the Soviet Union had a lot of natural resources. They had rivers and forests, and there was no Russian that was willing to go up there, or if he could be persuaded, he didn't stay. So you needed a population to build up the Soviet industry. And so Dalia, now there were other reasons.
But did they actually do that? I mean, I could
no,
understand
because
that
they were so
intellectually, but there
inefficient.
yeah.
But it was not only that reason, really,
Yes, there are
because
many reasons.
one reason it was like they built this Baikal, Amur, all this railway long way. For example, many
Which was
bones
much
of
later.
prisoners,
It was much later.
but there actually, as you told, it wasn't economically no reason to do something, and they left afterwards. And I think the reason was, as you told, to do people, to be cruel to them, to take their dignity and to make them dependent and
Basically to stop.
between Russian Revolution and the Second World War, they already in Soviet Union destroyed all the opposition. They destroyed the rich peasant class. And so now then when they accused the three Baltic states, the same rich peasants again. That's the same story. They have to deport them to Siberia to just destroy the existence of anybody who can think differently. And all intelligentsia mostly escaped to the west with Germans after the Second World War, at the end of Second World War, and those who left need to be suppressed. Otherwise, all the other people went to the forest to fight with Soviet. And as you know, the Second World War finished in Lithuania in 1956, when the last units of the Lithuanian partisans were being captured by the...
People selected all on what their knowledge was, or what their economic ability.
How were the people selected?
Yeah.
So how were people selected to do
So
this?
was it an educational
The
thing, or what?
intelligentsia.
Some neighbors just wrote some kind of... yes.
Betrayed them.
Yes.
But not only this, it was like classes, classes, the upper class. So it means professors, the bank, directors, the teachers, the
As it
professors.
is in the schools, there was a
good
teacher
studies.
also in the
Yes.
Italian school.
And everybody who was against the Soviet, of course, the Soviet system. So if you tell something openly, I don't like Stalin, then
That's
it
how
would
my
be
aunt
enough.
got imprisoned, actually. in
Exactly, you
Poland,
make
so,
a joke, you make a joke about him, and then you are there, and your family also.
So what was the reason for Dalia's family being?
Her father, he was first in bank, a big official name, and then he was also in one party, which was not, of course, Communist Party, but Lithuanian, and that was the reason, and the family also.
And it might even add, even a conspicuous personality would be deported simply because, you need to have everybody on a mediocre gray level. Nobody stand out, because you could then generate interest around yourself. You could lead people, and of course a leader is not what you
Michael
want.
would be deported.
Yes, right. Conspicuous and a publisher.
With a brain, yeah.
Yes,
and,
there's a question.
and question here and a question there. Just one sec, yes.
But don't you think there probably was some bureaucratic fantasy that the enormous fish reserves would be harvested by this station and salted down and sent
Right.
to feed the Russian armies? I mean,
There was
there
that.
clearly was a fantasy that
Yes,
Siberia
especially
could be a replacement
Right.
the land
Algirdas
in
is
the
shaking
west.
his head.
We don't
If you read how this fish production was organized in
that
Dalia's
well,
book,
quite.
there could be no any good economic theory behind it.
But it was in practice it was a complete.
Well, that's, I mean, this is the history of the Soviet Union, isn't it? I mean, each area was partitioned into the cotton growing area or the whatever, and each one was meant to produce a certain, really, regardless of whether the wherewithal existed in that particular part. So yes, it was complete fantasy.
There probably were enough fish.
There probably were enough fish. There was a question here.
I had a question for Algirdas, which was, how did your family get back to Lithuania?
So how did
your family
get back to
return to Lithuania?
Very simple. I after graduating from university, I worked for about 3.5 years in Academy of Sciences in Irkutsk. After that, I went for PhD studies in Moscow from 1984 to 1986. I defended my thesis in February '87, and I got assignment to work in Lithuania. I organized it for myself in Vilnius, in Institute of Mathematics and Cybernetics, as it was called at the time. And a couple of years ago, I started to tell my parents that let's move there, and it was a difficult process because at the time there was no free market for properties. It was the only way to exchange some flats, which are government-owned flats, between somebody who wants to go from Lithuania to Irkutsk. And apparently at the time, which was already when Lithuania freedom movement started, there was some person who was a military officer who was born in Irkutsk district, who wanted to return, who was serving in Kaunas at the time, who had three-room flat, which was, by Soviet standard, was exactly the same flat as in Irkutsk, which my parents had. So they agreed to exchange, and it was happy move from it was relatively happy, yes, because it was very rarely achievable,
And there's a question at the back there as well.
Yeah. I'm just curious, so when the manuscript was buried, the pages were in no particular order. So I'm just curious about
How it was ordered. Yeah.
and how it was ordered, and also whether, when you were translating, whether you were tempted to reorder it.
Right, very good question. So, I mean, this is a very difficult question. How, when the manuscript was buried in all these 229 pieces of paper, scraps of paper, many of them, they weren't in any particular order. So who and how were they edited? And how were you tempted, if not, or both of you as translators of this text, to possibly reorder the manuscript?
The manuscript had already been reordered when
So
we
when did
got
that
to
happen?
it.
And who did it?
91. It was
1991.
1991 it was founded.
Found.
And then it was given first in Kaunas to a museum, and two women they had also to restore, to order, and then to transcript, to do the transcription. And then afterwards, so it took like 2 years, something like this. And afterwards, so the editing, my aunt, she had the rights, because Dalia left her rights to my aunt. And then my aunt at the end was the editor. Yes.
You're
and
right.
Yes, and it appeared first in Lithuania it was a publishing house of Writers Union. And it appeared 1997. It was the first edition. Yes.
Of this book.
Of
this
this,
manuscript.
yes. And we took now, so we actually did the Lithuanian, order an edition, and
And so you stuck to the order that had been created by the editors at the time.
Yes.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
And I mean, when you were translating this, this is the question of translation, of course. To what extent did you feel that you were reordering it, or you wanted to add a few bits and pieces here?
No, the translation went through 3 incarnations. I mean, 10 years ago I began to translate it because when I first read it, a friend sent it to me from Lithuania when it first appeared. And I remember reading it and thinking, I mean, there I was stretched out on my couch with a glass of juice or wine or whatever, and thinking, I should be on my knees for anything like this. And I put it out of my mind because I didn't have time. But when I retired, I thought, all right, the time has come to translate this work. And so my first translation was as close to the original as I could make it, but I wasn't shy about improving on it. If I felt that it needed combining of sentences and that kind of thing. Minimal, but nevertheless. And then it didn't, academic publishers were the ones that would have been primarily interested. I was modeling it actually on the Holocaust literature. And but the academic everybody's
teaching that.
Yes, and I was teaching Holocaust literature, but all the publishers are cutting back. You know, all the publishing houses had cut back, and the complaint about money and whatever. So then, interestingly enough, this is where I went in a different direction. I sent it to an agent in New York. He was very interested, and he came back with the comment, and I quote, "No American reader is going to be able to connect with the stream of consciousness style."
Wow.
And I thought, well, if he can connect, I'll change it, you know, just to get this thing published. He doesn't like present tense, I'll turn it into past tense. He doesn't like stream of consciousness, I will remove that. I will introduce chapters. I will, in fact, follow something like Primo Levi, who organizes it by topic. Now, this is not by topic, but as we were talking the other day, she is very conscious of one topic at a time.
It was today, just briefly,
Yes,
time ago, we were
yes,
talking about it.
And so the point is that eventually, then we got to Mikey. Mikey didn't like any of that. You know, she said, you tidied it up. So she says, so then I went back to the German, I went back to Lithuanian, and I stuck as close as I possibly could, and I figured if there was going to be any deviation, it was going to be her fault. And so what you have now, but I'm delighted with the way it turned out.
I mean, and congratulations to all of you, because, you know, whether it's German, Lithuanian, you'll be able to read it in Lithuanian now as well, too, which is, again, a wonderful story that you've read it for the first time in English. You know, the story that you know, really.
That's amazing.
Anyway, congratulations to all of you. Nobody prepared any, but
I think it would be really nice.
yes,
Oh,
we'd like to. Were there any more questions first? There's one question here.
I had a really somber question actually. I just when I went to Lithuania, I was struck by the speed and scale of these, like, you know, these forced movements. Just the speed of it and the sheer numbers that went. Teachers, everybody just within 8 months. Just a feel for it. Say what proportion of people who transported like that would have survived that first winter? What, roughly?
Did you all hear the question?
Yeah.
Deportation in 1941, then 45, 47, 48. 4 waves altogether.
But no, it was 51 and 53 also.
No, not in 53.
51, but 51 it was also.
Yeah, sorry.
But different waves, but that wave 41 was the most cruel. It was before the Second World War started, and at that particular place, you know, behind the Arctic Circle, it was like 500 kilometers beyond the Arctic Circle, and they died. They wasn't prepared. They were with summer clothes, and there were 50% died, and 50%.
When the war started, nobody cared at all.
And it was like at that, I think it was 500 Finns were already there, and it came like, I don't know, 400 Lithuanians or 500, and
50%.
Yes, died. And for example, it was the Finns. They came from Leningrad, from Russia, and they had like this Leningrad blockade, and then they came there and
they were already dead, weren't they? They were
dead.
Because when, in fact, if you recall from the book as well, that when they arrived, there were already lots of corpses, and they were Finnish.
And it was a Jewish doctor actually who rescued them, because he came like Samodurov, and Dalia writes very, very warmly and about, for example, also the Ukrainian Vanya Glushina. It was also the medical sister, and they really, with their humanity, rescued them, you know, because that Samodurov, the doctor, the Jewish doctor, he told, I will take a commission and I will write and to see, because that one officer, Sventitsky, who was responsible, he was like feudal, I don't know, somebody who just, he was very cruel to people. He did what he wanted, you know.
I mean, the cruelty is what. Before you're going to read some Lithuanian, I think.
Some sentences.
He's going to read some sentences. But just
Yes.
what do you think kept Dalia going?
Well, it does take determination, stubbornness, and I also believe, now I'm drawing on my readings of the Holocaust, faith is less powerful. Anger, hatred, the need for revenge will sustain you longer. And remember, she says it really bred this inner fire. Some Lithuanian author, though, Jotite, called her fire in a sack. She was like fire, a flame. And so that's part of it. But the other part of it is that you really need to not do what you're told, but simply learn to manipulate the system, learn to figure out how it works, not be afraid of bringing your own thoughts to bear. That is, you can't follow orders. You just cannot. Russians are notorious, that is, when they were released to a commission, let's say, from the Soviet Union or for camps, I remember 30, 40 years ago, and the Russians who brought them over to the bridge, there was a bridge in Berlin that they needed to cross to the other side, and if they were told just walk straight to the Americans, they'd always walk in a zigzag. In other words, you do not follow orders. To follow orders is to die. So
There's actually one phrase which is from your translation. It's just here, 'cause I wrote it down because it's fine. This is it here. Do you want to just read it?
Images from the past can be more painful than a branding iron. They tear me apart. But I remember she also saying, however, they also fire me up to want to live.
She kept saying like a mantra through all this, I want to live, I want to live, we will not die.
Yeah. And that's why it's really hopeful book. Yeah. It's very hard, but still it's, I mean, I had really not feeling like I'm, down. It is something that will make you, wow. Yeah.
Exactly.
She's strong, and
she looks up at the skies. She sees the stars. She sees the northern lights. The joy of seeing the northern lights. I mean,
the beauty.
Yes. The beauty.
She's able to see the
capacity for beauty. Right.
Just something. Just 2 sentences, just to hear the language. Yeah. Rankomis draskau įėjimą į baraką, šliaužiu, šoku prie gultų, tyla. Baisi baimė sukausto smegenis, nesiryžtu nutraukti skudurų, bet tai tik akimirka. Lipu ant gultų ir atskleidžiu skudurus nuo veido. Kvėpuoja, kvėpuoja, kvėpuoja. You see, like she again and writes this rhythmic and music that she has, and it's about the mother that she come back and after the trial, and the mother she breath and breath and breath.
Perhaps I can read just a couple of sentences where I find her absolutely the most powerful. You really get a sense of her, and this is when she's on trial.
Thank you.
And they ask her whether she's ashamed of stealing boards for the fire, and she says, and a friend that was there with her is asked by the magistrate, is this the first time she's ever stolen anything? And her friend says, oh yes, definitely the first time. And she says, Dalia says, are you serious? First time? If you only knew Sventitsky, you could cover all the roofs of Trofimovsk with the boards I've stolen. You're such an ass. Haven't you figured out yet that we're on a tundra? There are no forests here, no vegetation of any kind. that even Neanderthals need fire. So what are we supposed to do? Gather the driftwood that washes ashore on the banks of the Lena? That's till 10 kilometers away. And just who do you think expect to haul it in? The corpses lying under our bunks, the sick who have dysentery, who soil themselves on their pallets? Or do you have Yasinski in mind, the one with scurvy, the one with the twisted legs who screams in pain all day? I mean, she really...
She's just
Yes.
as it is, doesn't she?
Exactly.
She really does. What an amazing, amazing woman. As are all of you.
Thank you so much. A huge applause.